This is Whiskey Whereabouts. I'm Tim, and today, as I record this, the channel crossed 2,000 subscribers, and I've got a pretty special bottle here to celebrate. This is the 2021 Jazz Fest limited release from Lagavulin, 13-year Lagavulin, 54.8% finished in Mezcal casks. But that is not all. I'm also going to compare this whiskey to last year's special release, the Lagavulin 12-year finished in tequila casks. Let's get started. My whiskey journey has taken me to Scotland and back. I've explored whiskey education, tastings, and distilleries from Islay to Speyside. And now my journey continues here, with you, on Whiskey Whereabouts. So I've been sitting on this bottle for a while. I personally bought this at the shop at Lagavulin when I was at the distillery, and it has traveled around, and I have waited for the right occasion to share it with you. And so what better time than crossing sort of a milestone for subscribers. So before we get into it, thank you to everybody who subscribed to the channel. Much appreciated. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you do. We get a lot more great videos coming. And in the meantime, we can open up this presentation box for this whiskey. It's pretty elaborate, more probably than necessary. It's a pretty big box. It's very nice. This design here is embossed on here, and it has a little, velvety kind of pull tab here that unlocks the bottle, and it's sitting in this, again, this soft sort of velvety lining. It's pretty elaborate for a bottle that isn't outrageously sort of priced. Bottle number 557 of 3,000 in this release, and as I said at the top, it's 54.8%, pretty close in line with what we expect from that annual 12-year release from Lagavulin. It was matured in refill American oak casks and then finished in those Mezcal casks. How long was it in the Mezcal casks? We don't know, but we know it couldn't have been too long because until 2019, the SWA didn't permit Mezcal or tequila casks, and some distilleries had made an effort to get a sort of exception for those types of casks. It's rumored that Diageo was pushing for this. They own Don Julio. It makes sense. But however long this 2021 release, it had to be less than 2 years, and it was probably honestly less than that. So if you don't know what's the difference between Mezcal and tequila, all tequila is Mezcal, not all Mezcal is tequila. Why? Because they are both made out of the agave plant, but the Mezcal, it can be made out of any agave, and tequila must be made out of the blue agave, sort of a subcategory. There's also a big difference here in the way that it's prepared, dried out. The sort of core of the plant is roasted in a pit with the Mezcal, and it is steamed with tequila. So the Mezcal has that added smoky influence from that process, akin, right, to burning the peat on the barley. Mezcal is a very, very broad category, broader than tequila, and we don't have a lot of information about the type of Mezcal casks that we're dealing with here. So going in on the nose here on this whiskey, and the first thing I'm struck with is it doesn't have this huge influence, tequila, Mezcal notes, a lot of tequila finished Scotch whiskeys, now that they're out there, will have qualities of a margarita to you. You'll pick up that saltiness and that sort of lime citrus. This is very subtle, and even the smoke, which is present, obviously, but it's a low, old fire. It's not roaring flames. It's been burning for a while. It's not out, but it's on the way. When you first pour this, before you let it sort of breathe, there's a very prominent element here that sits right on top. It's very vegetal. It has that sort of earthy vegetal, like zucchini almost quality to it. Now that it's had time to breathe, though, it's much more integrated with the sweeter elements, and I'm getting much more traditional sweeter elements. Getting the vanilla, has a creaminess, a lot of lemon citrus. Not necessarily what I think of when I've had the tequila influenced whiskeys I've had. More lime. This is more lemon. at the bottom there's a spice, but it's like those red hot candies. It's sweet cinnamon spice, and there's an herbiness, garden herb like that you would cook with, like a rosemary or something. As this has sat and I've let it breathe, this has really integrated and is really well balanced. This is not, I haven't got that far in this whiskey. It's been open for about 2.5 weeks, this bottle. I'm obviously rationing it. It's a special bottle, but yeah, a little time in the glass, really opening this one up. Going in on the palate neat on this, yeah, it's good. It is, there's the fire, right? It's the fire is lit now. It's charcoal, it's wood fire smoke, there's ash. It's almost, when you put it to your lips before you even take the sip, before it even hits the palate, having it that close, I think, to the nose and everything, you almost anticipate the smokiness, right? But it doesn't wash out everything else. There's plenty of the flavors here. It's sweeter and saltier on the palate. It's not sea salt. Salt-y. There's that vanilla, but now it's going with the salt. It's a caramel. It's much more sticky, sweet. This is almost 55% whiskey. It's not hot. It really isn't. It's not even that much of that black pepper kind of tingle on the tongue. Red pepper flakes. There's certainly some heat there, some spice, but again, it feels like it's kind of integrated. Doubling back for the finish now. Yeah, it's rich. It has that sort of wood smoke, very, very upfront. And once you get past that, it is sweet, a little bit of savory. The salty is there again. Now the sweetness, you get a wave, most likely from the casks, little bit of bitter, a little bit of not quite espresso, but maybe a coffee ground, but that sort of develops in the finish almost immediately into a rich chocolate sweet. You do have a little bit of that almost peanut. It's a long finish. It goes forever. I'm gonna have this sort of smoke remnants tickling the roof of my mouth and the back of my sinus until I clear this with water. Right? Very inviting, very satisfying, very, very well balanced. That finish has been used pretty effectively. Somebody has made some choices here and chosen to bring this influence in to an extent. I think that's probably what's manifesting in these sort of vegetal elements. What else can we unlock? We're gonna hit it with a little water here. I'm gonna give it a little bit, a nice generous bit of water here to see what happens. Then I'll come back and unpack it. Yeah, the fire's been doused out now. It's just embers now. The sweetness is there, but I'm getting much more fruit now. Sharp lemon. It's less vegetal. It's more apple. Yeah, the water is bringing up some of those a little bit more subtle notes. It's turning down some of the richer kind of vanilla, kind of sweet, and the smoke. I wouldn't say it's an improvement. It seems a little sharper and not as round and balanced. On the palate, it's not quite as creamy and rich on the mouthfeel, obviously, but the flavors aren't as rich. And it is still sweet, very vanilla. That caramel influence is there. There's something green, there's something vegetal. That note's kind of been turned down on the nose. It is under the surface here on the palate. On the finish, it's still long. Now we've got the full influence of the smoked cask, kind of tannins, the oak, that's been turned down. It's integrated now with that sort of chocolate covered espresso bean or something like that, leaning more toward the chocolate, but that bitter is kind of still held. The water's really not unlocking anything. I think this is really well balanced here at its bottled strength. So I have a fresh pour of this 13-year, the last one had water in it, and I have taken the opportunity to have some water and let this one breathe. I do think it needs some time in the glass, this bottle, at least where it's at, just kind of below the shoulders, to really open up. And I also have my pour of the 2023 12-year here. Now, this is last year's special release. It's 56.4%. And this one's finished in those Don Julio Tequila casks. We don't know for how long. And I have my little sort of sample bottle here. But I've had this whiskey a few times, including a tasting out of the same bottle that this sample came out of. And I brought this sample back just to share it with you. So, going in first, let's unpack the 12-year. Neat on the nose. Yeah, what a difference the 1 extra year here makes, or the difference between the tequila versus the mezcal, or both. This nose is presenting much differently for two whiskeys that have so much overlap here, right? 2% higher about on the ABV. At this ABV, you're not expecting to, immediately pinpoint that. This one presents hotter. It is sweet and rich. It's vanilla, salty, sort of caramel sweet, but a lot of fruit, tropical fruit, banana, and lemon. It's bright. Down at the bottom, there's an earthiness. Is it the peat earthiness? Is it something of that sort of vegetal element? It's hard to unpack here. It's really low in the mix, and that's where you're going to find the smoke. This fire isn't on embers. This fire's out. The smoke's still in the air. It's settling. It's settling at the bottom of this nose. This is also a strong nose, but coming from a totally different sort of point of emphasis in the mix. On the palate, this is a pretty rich, pretty well-rounded whiskey. But as compared to here, it's brighter, a little sharper, especially on the finish. But let's go back to the palate, where there's plenty of that sweetness. It's rich. It's vanilla, toffee. The smoke is here now. Ashy, low burning fire, ash across the tongue on the palate. But there is a very welcome sort of peanut, salt element here. Gives it a richness and a texture here. I think the biggest overlap maybe is on the palates on here. The finish is something quite different than this whiskey. So on the finish, you're gonna get that Lagavulin plume of smoke. You know it's coming. Followed by a lot of the similar rich sweetness, but there is a real sharpness here. Very discernible. It's berries, but they're tart berries. It is orange citrus now with the sweetness. There's more cask sort of bitter here. Younger whiskey, but you're getting a little bit more of that bitterness, that sort of coffee. There is that chocolate sweet now. There is an element of something that is, with that sharpness, that berry sharp that I'm talking about, sometimes a little bit more vegetal, a little bit more earthy. Is that the tequila cask influence? It's hard to tell because it's in that mix. It's underneath those layers. It's stacked. But I'm talking about sort of flavors from different sort of sections of the flavor wheel here, which is nice. It's all pretty complementary. This one is a little bit sharper, a little bit more of the sort of bitter element on the finish. Still very, very inviting and very rich. Very quickly going back to the 13 just to compare here. Going from the one to the other, you start picking up, even though I've sort of cleared with water here, but you're picking up some of the elements. They seem closer together, having gone from one to the other, even giving a little space. This one just has a little bit more of a round sort of richness with balance. Very satisfying. Not sharp, not hot. What influences come in from the Mezcal casks is really well integrated. They're both very good. This one's better. I'm sorry to say, because the odds of you getting a bottle of this are very low. This you can probably still get. This one is pretty special. It's a really, really strong whiskey, and having it with a legit competitor like this, a worthy comparison whiskey really sets into relief how good of a whiskey this is. So how do I rate this whiskey? I actually found this one a little tough to rate because I've got a kind of attachment to this whiskey. It's a special whiskey. You know, I personally brought it back. I've saved it up, and high expectations, and it met the expectations. It stood toe-to-toe with that 12-year. I have kind of compared it to some of the other whiskeys that I've given the sort of maximum rating here on the channel. Some of those have been achieved with the benefit of value. I'm just gonna tell you that value doesn't matter on this whiskey. You can't buy it anymore. I mean, the only way you can get this whiskey is on the secondary market. I will say that I didn't pay much more for this whiskey than the 12-year costs in most places, so it actually was pretty reasonably priced for what you're getting. If that matters to you, you got it in a big fancy display box. That feels very special. But I am going to say that this is a very, very good whiskey. I don't know if it's completely transcendent, completely sublime. So I'm gonna say 4 3/4 glasses for the Lagavulin 13 year, the Jazz Fest 2021. And I'm just so happy that I was able to share it with you here on the channel. I've got some big bottles still that I got at distilleries yet to be opened, and some other big milestones to be celebrated not too far in the distant future. So if you haven't subscribed, make sure that you do. Hit that big button that's gonna pop up right over here, and I'll see you on the next one.